How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Hey, Daf 5 of Masechta BavaKama. Friends. Okay, now, honestly, I gotta be honest, it's a shtickle technical, this Daf. Alright, what can I tell you? Alright, we're gonna start on Daf Daled Amud Beis. We got about 10 lines to do on Daf Daled Amud Beis. It's about 10 lines from the bottom. It says, Tani Reb Chia, yo? Got it? Good, let's go weiter. Tani Reb Chia taught. Esim vayba ovis nizikin. Oh, so he says there are Taka 24, ovis nizikin. Interesting. Okay. So our Mishnah said that there are arba ovis nizikin. There are 4. We saw yesterday at the end of the daf Reb Oshaye who says that there are 13. Now we see Reb Chia who says 24. Here we go. So again, Tani Reb Chia teaches Esim vayba Avos Nizikin, that the Taka 24 Avos Nizikin, Tashlume Kefel. Okay, so when a fellow is a ganif, he steals epis, so he has to pay double. With Tashlume Abava Chamisha, if he steals a sheep or an ox, and then he slaughters it or sells it, and depending if it's a sheep or an ox, you pay 4 times the amount, 5 times the amount. That's Taka a lot. If you steal an ox and you slaughter it, you have to pay 4 times the amount of an ox. An ox is not cheap. Wow. Where am I? What did I just say? Okay, so Keifel Tashlume Chamisha V'ganif, a ganif who's modeh, he admits it, so then he just has to pay the principal amount, not the Keifel. V'gazlan, or a difference between a ganif and a gazlan. I think the main difference is that a ganif steals when nobody's looking. A gazlan steals kind of in public. Kilu is not, like a ganif, like is very, very sneaky. A gazlan is less sneaky. Ve'edim zomimin. Who can tell me what an edim zomimim are? That if you have witnesses, right, Shimon and Levi testify against Ruvain, and it turns out in a particular way they're liars. In a particular way that they would be edim zomimin, so they have to. Their punishment is whatever they were trying to make Reuven do. Va'ones, va'mafate, u'motzi shemra. When it comes to ones, which I'm not going to translate because I don't want the people at YouTube to age restrict daf hey of Masechta BavaKama. Va'mafate, or seduction, u'motzi shemra. If a fellow gets married and then he claims that his wife is not a basula. Now the Gemara is actually going to discuss a little bit which aspect, because there are different aspects of these things, right? There's the knas, right? By onus mafata it's 50 shekels, and by motzi shemra it's 100. But there's also other things like boshes and pagam. So we're going to discuss that. A fellow who is mitami trume, or he mixes truma into chulin, or he pours somebody's wine on some getchkes. V'ani tleiser, plus that was 11, plus the 13 of Reb Oshaye. Ha esim varba, 24. Voila. Okay. Very nice. Nice one there, Reb Chia. Reb Oshaye, my taima lotani hane. Now, how come Reb Oshaye mentions 13? Reb Oshaye, why don't you mention 24? The 24 of Reb Chia. What's wrong with Reb Chia's 24? So Reb Oshaye says, well, I'm only talking about mammon, I'm not talking about knas, right? Something like kefel, arba v'chamisha, these are knosses. These are fines. I'm not talking about fines, I'm talking about mammonis. Ganif v'gazlon dimamonahu lisnei. Okay. But what about the ganif v'gazlan, right? We said it's talking about the principal amount. So that's not a fine, right? We said by a ganif we're talking about modeh b'knas, right? That if he admits it, so then he would only have to pay the principal amount, not the kefel. So these are mammonis. There's no fine there. So akatani lei shomerchinam v'ashol. To which Reb Oshaye says, well, I actually did mention them, right? A shomerchinam, right? I mentioned shomerchinam b'ashol. So when it comes to shomerchinam, so if he's toyin tan as ganif, right? So So if Shimon gives epis to Ruvain to watch for him, so Ruvain is going to be, he's only going to be chayiv if he's negligent. Now, if he claims that it got stolen, so Ruvain would be potter. But if it turns out that it didn't get stolen, he said it got stolen, but it didn't, so he'd be chayiv. So Rabbi Shai says, look, if we're talking about somebody who, a ganif, so I mentioned a shomer, I mentioned a shomer chinam, that a shomer chinam would be chayiv if he's toing tanis ganif, if he says that it got stolen and it didn't. So I mentioned ganif v'gazlin. Reb Chia nami hatanale shomer chinam v'ashol. So now Reb Chia, Rabbi Shai explained why he didn't. Rabbi Shai explains why he left out ganif and gazlin, because it already says shomer chinam v'ashol. Rabbi Chia, why do you need to include it? Why do you need to include ganif and gazlin if there's already shomer chinam and shol? So Tana Mamona the also li'ada be'ater v'katani Mamona the also li'ada be'isura. So says Rabbi Chia, well, there's actually a big a sort of I don't know what the word I'm thinking of is, but there's like a core difference between a shomer chinam and a ganif. A shomer chinam, when Shimon gave something to Ruvain to watch, so it went into Ruvain's possession in a permitted manner. That's completely permissible. Shimon gave Ruvain something to watch for him. Now it turned out he said it was stolen and it wasn't, so it became murky, became problematic. But what does it say? It says the also the other be'ater. But it initially came to Reuven's possession in a permissible manner. Masha ein kain, by a ganif and a gazlin, somebody who's a thief, it came into his possession in unpermitted manner, and therefore they're separate things, and that's why Rabbi Chia felt they should be listed separately. Edim zomamin dimamona hu lesne nu. But what about nu Rabbi Shaya? You're saying that you mentioned 13 as opposed to 24 because you're only mentioning mamanis, not knas. Well, Edim Zomamin is not a knas. It's not considered a knas. It's considered mamon. It's not considered a fine. It's considered a principal amount. So then, Rabbi Shai, why don't you list Edim Zomamin? So Sarvalak Rabbi Akiva. Well, Rabbi Shai holds like Rabbi Akiva who treats Edim Zomamin take as a knas. That Rabbi Shai holds like Rabbi Akiva who treats Edim Zomamin as a knas, and that's why I left it out. The Amr that Rabbi Akiva says in Mishalmin al pi atzman, that they're not Mishalmin al pi atzman, meaning when it comes to a knas, when it comes to a fine, if you admit it, so then you're potter. Right? For example, if a fellow is a ganif, he steals epis, so he has to pay kefil. But if he admits that he stole it, so he's moda b'knas is potter. He doesn't have to pay kefil. So it says Rabbi Akiva that when it comes to Edim Zomamin, if you have Shimon and Levi who testify falsely as Edim Zomamin against Ruvain, and they're busted in court, but then they run away to another court and they admit in the other court that they're Edim Zomamin, they'd be potter. They'd be potter. So Rabbi Akiva treats Edim Zomamin taka as a knas, and therefore Rabbi Shai says, I hold like Rabbi Akiva that we treat it like a knas, and therefore I'm only talking about mamanis, I'm not talking about knosses. But he saw like Rabbi Akiva. But if Rabbi Shai in fact holds like Rabbi Akiva, so less ne tre gavne shor ho. But then, right, we had discussed yesterday that according to Rabbi Shai, why don't we mention two different types of shor? We said, well, there aren't two different types of shor. It's the same halacha whether a shor is azik shor or a shor is azik adam, whether an ox gores another ox or an ox gores a fellow. It's the same thing. So therefore, there's no need to list it twice. But if Rabbi Shai holds like Rabbi Akiva, then actually there is a difference between an ox that gores a fellow and an ox that gores an ox. Should we make up a word for ox? Nah. I'm sure we'll get there. I'm sure some kind of clever nickname for an ox will come up, and then we'll have another inside joke to keep out the new people. So now, let's nitre gavne short. So if Rabbi Shaya in fact holds like Rabbi Akiva, so then there should be two. He should list. Excuse me. Oh my God, this cough. I apologize if it's unpleasant to listen to me babbling. Akoponim. So according to Rabbi Akiva, the taka are two different types of shore, and therefore Hoshaya should list two different types of shore. Lesnei shor the azik shore, lesnei shor the azik odom. It should list a ox that gores an ox and an ox that gores a fellow. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva, says Rabbi Akiva, aftam shechavo be'odom, that a shore tam that gores a person, mishalim b'moser nezek shalim, be'etzim he pays nezek shalim. So there's a difference there. That a shor da'azik shor, if it's a shor tam, it's chatzi nezek. But shor da'azik odom, if it's a shor tam, it's nezek shalim. So there's a difference there. So B'shai should mention both. But ha'taver Rabbi Akiva l'gzize, no. Rabbi Akiva literally means he broke his fist, but he kind of clarified it for us and said, no, it's not as extreme as you think. The Tani would learn in the Brisa, Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva, Yochol aftam shechova ba'odom. Is it possible that if a shor tam who gores a fellow, yishali mina aliyah, that he would have to pay even more than the value of the animal? Talmud Lomar, ye'ose lo. It says it shall be done, right? It says ye'ose lo in the context of a shor shenagach odom. Migufo mishalim, from the body of the ox itself, he pays. Ve'enu mishalim min aliyah, but not more than that. Meaning, if an ox gores a person, so even if it's a short tam, yes, so Rabbi Akiva would say that you would pay nezek shalim, not chatzi nezek. However, it would be nezek shalim only up to the value of the ox itself, and therefore there's a cap on it, and there's a limitation on it, and therefore it doesn't make it that different than chatzi nezek, because since you're not going to end up paying the full value of the damage anyway, so it's not considered different enough, and therefore Rabbi Shai doesn't list it. Okay, fine. Ha'ones v'amafata v'amotzi shemra d'mamonahu lisnei. So, frekti gemara nu Rabbi Shai. Why not include ones mefate motzi shemra? Because that's mominus. Now, yes, by ones and mefate, there's a 50 shekels fine. By motzi shemra, there's 100 shekels fine. But there's also, as we're about to see, there is boshes. There is pigam. Now those things are not a fine, those are mominus. So therefore, if we focus on those, so that's mominus. So why doesn't Reb Hoshaya include those? So monafsha. So the Gemara says, well, look, either way you look at it, where am I? Inezek. No, skip that. Skip inezek tanale. Itzar tanale. If we're talking about the tsar, well, Rabbi Shai mentioned tsar. Iboshes tanale, if we're talking about the embarrassment, he mentioned boshes as well. Ipagam hanu nezek, and if we're talking about pagam, the fact that now her value is less because of what happened, well, that's nezek, right? The depreciation in value. So if he already mentioned tsar, he already mentioned boshes, he already mentioned pagam. So what's less? Knosa lo kamari. The only thing left is the 50 shekels or 100 shekels knas based on what it is, based on ones mefata or motzi shemra. And Rabbi Shai already said that, right? That he wasn't talking about knas, he was only talking about moments. So therefore, those aren't relevant. But what about metame? If a fellow's metame trume, or if he mixes trume into chulin, or if he pours wine onto getchkis, the mamonahu, that he has to pay back the value of the damages. So lesne. So Rabbi Shai, why don't you include those? Well, manav shachi hezek she'eno nikar shmei hezek. If damage that is not recognizable, right? For example, if you're metame truma, it looks exactly the same. You can't notice the damage. So if hezek she'eno nikar shmei hezek, if unrecognizable damage is considered damage, hatana le nezek. Well, we mentioned, Rabbi Shai mentioned nezek. And if unrecognizable damage is not considered damage, well then have a leknoso lo kamari. Then why would you have to pay for these things? It must be a fine. And Rabbi Shai is not talking about fines. So lemux of Reb Chia. So let's say that Reb Chia, who lists these things, mitame, midameya, minasech, hezek sheinu nikr, lo shmei hezek. So let's say that Reb Chia must hold that hezek sheinu nikr, such as these examples, is not considered hezek to ishmei hezek, hatan le nezek. Because if hezek sheinu nikr is considered hezek, well, we already have, right? The Rabbi Shai already listed nezek, and Reb Chia's 24 are building on top of Rabbi Shai's. So we already mentioned nezek. So if hezek sheinu nikr is shmei nezek, well, we already mentioned nezek. So it must be that he holds that hezek sheinu nikr lo shmei hezek, and they're knases. So tana hezeka de minkura, but tana hezeka de lo minkura. So yeah, but the thing is, that's punct to point, that when Rabbi Shai mentioned nezek, he was talking about nezek damages that are recognizable. Davka, mitame, minasech, midameya, these are things that are unrecognizable, so we're listing those as separate entries. B'shlam l'tana, okay, fine. Givaldik, so we explain Rabbi Shai, we explain Rabbi Chia, fine. B'shlam l'tana didon, so I understand our Tana, who says, Arba avos nizikin, that there are 4 avos nizikin. So Tana Minyana, it mentions 4, lemute Rabbi Shai, to say that, yeah, there are 4, and it's excluding all these other things. For example, the additional 9 of Rabbi Shai. Rabbi Shai Tana Minyana lemute Rabbi Chia. And Rabbi Shai says there are 13, to the exclusion of the other things that aren't listed, which are Rabbi Chia's additional 11. Rabbi Chia's 11. Sounds like it's going to be a great movie. Rabbi Chia's 11. I wonder what they did. What did Rabbi Chia's 11 do? What did Rabbi Chia's 11 do? I don't know. I'm sure it's a great story though. Why does Reb Chia say 24? Why does Reb Chia say 24? Why does Reb Chia say 24? Like what? 24 so what's being left out? These 24. What else is there? Lemute moser mefago, to exclude a snitch and somebody who's mefago, right? That if a yid snitches to the Ovdei Kechavim about his friend, and it causes his friend to lose damage, so I guess the snitch needs to pay. And mefagel, if a kohen makes a korban pigel, right? What does Rashi say about mefagel? Kohen sheshachad korban shel yisrael chatas l'shum shlamim. Okay, interesting that he calls it pigel, right? But he slaughters a korban chatas as a korban shlamim, which means that the person who's offering the korban is going to have to bring a new one. So the kohen's going to have to pay for the damages. So V'lesnei, wait, where am I? I'm sorry. So Reb Chia mentions 24 to the exclusion of Moser and Mefagel. V'lesnei, why not list them? Well, Bishlam and Mefagel b'kachim lo kamari. So I understand why we don't mention pigel why Reb Chia leaves out pigel, because we're not talking about kachim. But Ella, Moser, my taima lo tani, but why not include the snitch? Well, shiny Moser to dibura. Well, the snitch is just babbling. V'dibura lo kamari. And Chia says we're not just talking about babblers. But Motzi Shemra the Diburahu Vikatani, but Motzi Shemra, when the fellow gets married and then he says Lo Matzosi Levitcha B'sulim, so he's just babbling. Dibur de Izbe Maisu, yeah, but it's a post-action babble. There was a Maisa, there was a Maisa Bia, and then he babbled. Va Edom Zom and Dibur delays Be Maisu. What about Edom Zom that Reb Chia listed? They're just babbling. Vikatani, it's listed. So Hasam Afagav delays by Maiser Achmona Karye Maiser. Yeah, but by Edom Zomim, even though technically, they're just babbling, but the Torah refers, mentions Maiser in describing Edom Zomim. D'chsiv va'asisem lo kasher zomim lasos lachim va'asisem Maiser. You do to them like they try to do to their fellows. So therefore, we consider it to be a Maiser, but a snitch is purely babbling. Bishlam al Tana Didon, I understand our Mishnah, Tana Ovis, Bichlal Dika Toladis, so our Mishnah, right, that was, what was it, the first and second daf of daf Beis and Gimel of Masechta BavaKama, I think. We were discussing what are the Tolados of the different Ovis. So our Mishnah mentions there are Arba Ovis Nezikin, and then there's Toladis, El Reb Chia, Reb Shai, Ovis Bichlal Dika Toladis, Tolosei Ma'niu. But Rabbi Shai and Rabbi Chia, who are listing 13 Avos Nizikin, 24 Avos Nizikin. Avos, what are their Toladis? So answer to Gemara, Amar Babao, look, when we say that they're Avos, if I understand correctly, meaning when we say that they're Avos, it's not to say that there are Toladis, but that, where am I? So Amar Babao, Kulan Ki Avos L'Shalem Mimetav. They're like Avos that if you pay with property, you have to pay from the best. That's why we call these things Avos, that they're like the Avos, and that you have to pay Mimetav Sadeu from the best fields, from the Edis. My time Alkom Asya Tachas Nesini Yishalim Kesef. All of these 24 have either the word Tachas or Nesina or Yishalim or Kesef, and these words are able to link back to either Regel or Shein or Bor or whatever in order to Karen, right, in order to basically say that just like by those, right, by Karen or by Shein or by Bor, you have to pay, right, Mimetav Sadeu. So also by all of these 24, you would pay from the Edis as well. So now the Mishnah had said, Lo Arei Ashor Karei Amave, that the ox is not like the Mave, right? We saw Machlokas what Mave means, but the shore is not like the Mave. Maika Omer, what are we saying? Omer Vzvid Mishmei Derove, Hachi Kamer, this is what it means. Lichtov Rachmon Achada V'Teisi Idoch Mine. Well, can't we just list one of them and then learn the other one from it? So Hadar Amar Chadam Echada Lo Aseh. To say no, we can't, right? Lo Arei Ashor Karei Amave, V'Lo Arei Amave Karei Ashor. And we discussed that yesterday, right? Rav and Shmuel, right? How exactly are they different? Seder. Fine. V'lo Zev V'Zeh Sheish Ben Ruachayim. Now we said that Shor and Mave have Ruachayim, Masha'en Kain fire, Masha'en Kain hever. So my comment, what's it saying? Amar B'Mishayim Mishmei Derava Achi Kamar Lichtov Rachmana Taita V'Teisi Idoch Minayu. Well, can't we just list Shor and Mave and then learn out Eish from it? So Hadar Amar Chadam Itaita Lo Asi. Would you say no? You can't, because Shor and Mave have Ruachayim, but Eish does not. Amar Rava says, Rava V'chulu Ki Shadis Bor Beinayu Asya Kulu B'Matzad Levar Mikeren Mishum De'ikal Mifrach Malakulu Sheken Muad Mitchilasun. You hear that? Probably not. I'll explain it, but I'll explain it on a very shallow level. There is a humongous Rashi over here that if you're interested, you can read. It's not that hard per se, but you got to go through it slowly. But basically, Rashi just explains the different permutations probably. So what time is it? What time is it? 5 o'clock. What time is Shkia? Shkia is now. Well, I guess we better hurry up. Al-Koponim, Al-Koponim, I should have a mincha, but Al-Koponim, we have to finish stuff. So be'etzem, if you take Bor and Karen, I'm not going to explain it, but if you take Bor and Karen, so then you'd be able to learn out all the other things, Shein, Regel, Eish. So you'd be able to learn out, am I forgetting one? No. So you'd be able to learn out all these other things. But if you take Bor and any of the others, like Bor and Shein, for example, you'd be able to learn out Regel and Eish, but you wouldn't be able to learn out Karen. So you don't need to list all 4 of them, right? If you take Bor and one other, you could learn out all the Bor and one other, you could learn out the other ones as well. The only one that you wouldn't be able to learn out is Karen, but if you pair Karen with Bor, then you can learn out all the others. If you pair Bor with any of the others, you'd be able to learn out all the other ones other than Karen, Seder. So Amar Rava says, Rava, I'm going to read that again. Amar Rava says, Rava, V'chulu, that all of these avos that we talked about in the Mishnah, Kishad is Bor Benayu, if you take Bor and any of the other ones, 2 of them, Asya Kulu, you would then be able to learn out the rest, B'ma Atzad, based on, the similarity is that they cause damage and you have to pay. Levar mi Karen, the only exception being that if you take Bor and any of the other ones, you wouldn't be able to learn out Karen. But again, if you take Bor with Karen, you can learn out all the other ones. Mishum dikal mifach, because you could say ma'alekulu shkem muad mitchilas. And look, the other ones you chayiv because those things are muad, right? Those are avos because they're muad mitchilas. That you have to pay full damages the whole time, as opposed to Karen, where you starts out as Chatzi Nezek. But Ulamanda Amar Adrabah, but there is an opinion that says, no, Fakert, Karen Adifa, no, Karen is more stringent, the Kavanosu Lahazik, it intends to damage. Well, if that's the case, well then, you could say, Afilu Karen Nami, Asya, well then, you would also be able to learn out Karen if you had Bor and any of the other ones. So if that's the case, that we really only need to write Bor and one other one, so why do we have all of them? Well, Karen l'chalik min tama l'muedis. Well, we have Karen in order to make the distinction between a tam and a muad, right? That a shor muad, when it comes to Karen, is nezek shalom. Shor tam is chatzi nezek. Shein v'regel, when it comes to tooth and foot, lefotum b'shus harabim, to say that they are potter b'shus harabim, as it says uvir b'sdei acher, in somebody's private property, but in the b'shus harabim they'd be potter. Bor liftoret bor sakelim, and a pit that you're potter for kalim. So meaning if you have like an animal that falls into a pit, so you'd be chayiv for the damages of the animal, but if it had like vessels on it, you'd be potter for the vessels. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that no, you are chayiv for damage that happens to vessels in a pit. So lifter bo esa adam. Well, so the pit is to say that an adam is potter, that a fellow who falls into a pit and dies, you would be potter. Adam, we mentioned Adam l'chayv b'arba dvarim, to say that you're chayiv for tzar, ripoy, sheves, boshes. Eish lifter bo es atamun, and fire is mentioned in order to indicate that you are potter for something that's hidden. So if a fire burns up a pile of stuff, and in the pile was other stuff, so you'd be potter for the stuff that was in the pile. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that no, you are chayiv even for the things that are hidden away in the pile. So lasuye mai. So what's included by eish? Lasuye lichecha niro v'sichsecha avonav. That I guess if the fire singed a furrow of stuff that was planted or stones or something, you'd be chayiv for that. That's why we had to list all of these things, even though we only technically need two. But there are unique halachos by all of them. That for those unique halachos they were listed. Friends, that was Daf Hey of Masechta BavaKama. We saw Reb Chia's opinion, which is that, right? Reb Chia's statement that there are 24 Avos Nezikin, and then we started getting back into the Mishnah. Why do we have to list all the different things? And all right, that was Daf Hey Masechta BavaKama. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.